Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Normally, we go in search of a guru. In very rare cases, as was in your case, the guru came in search of you. How did you react at that time? And 60 years hence now, how do you look at it back?
Let me start with 60 years hence now. Now I look at that experience as the most important part of my life. Without that I don't know what would have happened to me. So you said he came in search of me. That is because of the link which we had in previous births. I am a great believer in previous births because for me it's not a belief. For me it's a fact of life. I can't prove it to anybody, but so that link was there, and Sri Guru Babaji sent him to go and pluck me out and say, this guy is there, go bring him out, he needs to do some work. So that's how it happened that he came looking for me. It's because of my desire, keen desire to reach whatever people reach, that Babaji impelled Babaji to come and pick me up. And as I said, now I think it was the most crucial part of my life, because it could have gone the other way around. Suppose he decided not to come, I would be like anybody else, having children, doing business, teaching something. But now life has changed for me, and it's that incident that is primarily responsible for that. Babaji's blessings, of course.
But you were barely 9 at that time. And even before that, had you the inclination for the spiritual seeking?
I did have, because when I was a very small boy of 4 or 5, I remember that I was not like the usual normal children. I like to play and all the mischief that young people do, that was all there. I had this inclination to go to temples, which is very unusual considering my background of being born in a Muslim family. So whenever I heard of a temple, in the mornings there was, if you remember the Abhedananda Ashrama in fort, inside the fort, very near Padmanabha Swami temple. Swami Abhedananda was alive then. In the morning he used to have a Nagara Sankirtan. They used to sing and with mridangs and walk along our street in Vanjur. I used to be so attracted by it that everybody in the house thought, why is this fellow so attracted by it? So I used to go out and do namaskaram to them. I gave some money once when they were collecting, and so I had this. And when I saw Swami Abhedananda, I felt I must go and see him sometime. He looked so peaceful and so sweet, so nice. So all these thoughts, and I used to spend hours together looking up at the sky when there was nothing. There were only clouds. My grandmother thought actually that there must be something wrong with me, because why would a little boy sit on the parapet and stare at the sky for 1 hour, 2 hours? When I saw the clouds, I used to think they are Himalayas. They are like snow-clad Himalayas. I have never seen the Himalayas at that point of my life. So there was some inclination, which culminated later, but the next important point of that inclination was Babaji coming to see me at the age of 9. I think it was a sequence of events.
And 10 years later, you met him at the Vyasa Guha
Yes.
in the Himalayas.
Yes.
And you say that it was a new beginning in your life.
Absolutely.
How do you explain that?
Because I had left the ways of the world behind. So, normally what you go to college, you study or you work, you earn, you have a family, you have to eat, you have to. Here I was completely free. Even though I knew that I am going to be with Babaji and do exactly what he does, but it is out of freedom, not out of any bondage. That was a completely new experience for me in life. So I said, new chapter has started. It's like a bird is out of its nest into full fresh air.
But even before that, you had several experiences, like you were having seen Gayatri Mantra in your dream.
Yes, yes, but this was actual. That was a dream. This was physical. I felt that I am in the Himalayas now, finally, at last, and here I am like a free bird. Nobody is going to catch me now. You know, I am on my own. And the additional thing was that Babaji was with me. I cannot explain to you how wonderful to be in the presence of a realized yogi. It's a completely different cup of tea.
And Sri Narayana Guru also had influenced you.
Yeah, because being born and brought up in Kerala, Sri Narayana Guru is known to most people, especially in Trivandrum. It's so close to Shivagiri. So, and during my wandering days, I went to Narayana Guru's place he was not there, of course, to Shivagiri, and there was Swami Brahmananda who was heading the ashrama. So I went and told him I want to spend some time here. So he asked me my name and everything. Then he was very happy. He said, please stay here as long as you want. So I lived there for at least 3 months. And there was a young Swamiji there, I forget his name, from the Narayana Matha, from the order, who took me to his bedroom. And there in the bedroom I saw a small picture of Kaladi Mastan, the Avaduta who used to live near the beach. So I asked him, how you are keeping it? He said, I consider him as my Guru. I said, I thought you are from the Narayana Guru order. So he said, so what? It makes no difference. So this, and then I read about Narayana Guru's teachings, and it affected me very much.
And you had met Yogi Gopal Swami.
Yes. Yogi Gopala Swami I met when I was very young. I was I think 8 years old. Before Babaji came to fetch me, I met Gopala Swami in Ananta Narayana Pillai's house, who used to have a firewood shop in the turning near Ambuja Vilasam. So I went to there. I didn't know. They said there is no. Used to go and have maths tuition with Ramaswamy, his son-in-law. That day they said there is no tuition today because Swami has come. I said, which Swami has come? Curious, 8 years old. No, you can go home. Then his mother came, this man's mother, and he said, if you want to see Swami, come. So I went inside. I saw a man sitting wearing slack shirt and a cloth tied around this, haircut like a army man, ex-army, normal white shirt. And then he saw me. Then he said, come here. He said, what do I do? I said, then he put his hand on my head and said, Nalla kuttiyanallo, he said. And after that, he said, I came away because I got a little worried. I said, I have to go home, and I came out. Afterwards, the people told me that he always used to inquire once in a while. I never met him afterward. Where is this boy?
So you had created that impression in him.
Yeah, he felt there was something. He felt there was something.
Then you met Swami Tapasyananda, then Mai Ma, and even Pundura Swami. So their influence is also there in you.
I think their blessings are there, I would say that way. And as far as Tapasyananda Swami was concerned, he was heading the Ramakrishna mission Trivandrum. So I was a student at that time. So I met him there, and later on I met him again in when I went to the Ramakrishna mission, and when he was head of the mission in Mylapore here in Chennai. At that time he was vice president of the order. Then he asked me a very peculiar, he said, you all these years you are associated also with Ramakrishna mission. I have worked in Ramakrishna mission in different places, but you have not taken the Ramakrishna mantra. Then I said, but Swamiji, I don't like to take the Ramakrishna except from you, but you can't give because you are not the president. He said, who says? Just day before yesterday the order has come that the vice president can also initiate you into the mantra. So I said, so when do we get it? He said, come to the next Guru Purnima, which was just about 3 weeks later. So I went to Mylapore with a piece of mundu and one neryada and some flowers and a little money for dakshina, and I said, now I have come. He said, okay, take the mantra. So I got that mantra also from Swami Tapasyananda. So I consider him as one of my gurus, Upaguru you can say, but I respect him a great deal. Even today I follow, I love the best translation of the Gita I love is Tapasyananda. It's so simple and direct. And one more incident I must tell you. I went to see him at that time in Mylapore after many years. So he asked me, Acha, do Malayalam he asked me, Ningal ee 5 നേരം നിസ്കരിക്കാറുണ്ടോ? Do you do 5 times prayer? I said, no, so this is all gone long ago, I don't do any such thing. I do Sandhya Vandanam, I do Meriga. I said, why are you asking me? He said, because it is a wonderful practice, because I do it regularly, that's why I am asking you. I said to myself, this is India.
This is India.
Yeah, this is India, because no, it's not possible to get such a response from anywhere in the world. Not possible.
Even I am surprised.
Anybody is surprised. Whoever hears this are very surprised. He said, I do regularly because it's a beautiful practice. Why did you give it up? I said, now I'm not going to.
Now traveling back to the Himalayas, you met Tenkasi Siddhar there.
Yes, that is in the high up in the hills near Panchkedar.
What was your experience?
Well, I can't say because Babaji said that he was a highly advanced spiritual soul, Tenkasi Siddhar, and he had come. How he had come there, that I don't know. And Tenkasi Siddhar told me, oh, you must be missing sambar and all this South Indian food. I said, not really. He said, no, you don't bluff me. So he said, okay, so come inside, we will eat some nice sambar. And I'm wondering, there is no kitchen there, there is nothing there. So he had hot rice and hot sambar and ghee and papadam and everything. And for the first time I realized I am still not free of attachment to this food. Yeah, because by the time I was thinking I am free.
Can you say something about your first initiation?
There are several steps to this, but what I consider to be my first initiation would be in the caves in Charanapaduka behind Badrinarayan temple. There Babaji one day called me, made me sit down and touched my Ajna chakra and then my Nabhi and then my heart chakra and gave me the Bala Tripura Sundari mantra of the Sri Vidya, which is just 3 Bijaksharas. Aim Kleem So. So he touched me in the spot, gave me the Aim Kleem So and said, this is your initiation. So the moment I got that mantra and when I touched those parts and meditated, I felt a very pleasant, cool, moon-like fire burning inside me. It started from the spine and went up and it did its own dance in a graceful manner, and I felt deep ecstasy and a sense of growth that I am not confined to this body. It's much more than that. So that I think is my first initiation in this birth, in this life.
No, in this birth, your body is 69 years old.
Now.
Yes. As we speak.
Yes.
And what do you think is the purpose of life?
For me, I can't say the purpose of life of everybody. My purpose in life is to let people know that there are greater mysteries beyond the ordinary world that we live in. That don't confine yourself to the five senses. There's much more, and the spark that is inside you is part of the transcendental self, of the Supreme Being. I think my purpose, I've been tuned and trained to bring people into this mode of thinking so that they break free of the limitations. That's my purpose.
And if there is a transcendental Atma, as you say, why do we see so much of grief, agony, anger, conflicts?
Sir, these are all preparations finally to come there. No one can make pure steel without heating it and turning it in the anvil and beating it into shape. We don't see that. We only see one side of the world, physical, and we think, oh, there's so much suffering. It's actually suffering that turns one into spiritual. I'm not saying deliberately we should make somebody suffer. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think that is the right. Personally, I don't believe in it. It may be okay for some people.
Individual spiritual quest is so different and unique in every individual. Why do we have satsang?
Satsanga, because when you say satsanga, there are people of different categories, of different character, of different backgrounds coming together. Now, it is possible, in my satsangs, I always tell people, there is no single path. Don't think that I have come here to preach some single path. I have come here basically to make you not neglect the inner awakening that is in each one of you. Your paths may be different. So my satsang, even today we had a satsang, the main thing was that there is no one path which everybody needs to follow. There are different ways. Okay? Even if you roughly divide, there is Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. There are so many, and one cannot be suitable for all. You see, there are different, because we have different backgrounds, different past lives, different setups, so they can be different. But one thing is that in the satsang, what I try to convince or make people understand is, please open your minds. Don't think that this physical world is the only thing on earth. That this suffering and pain and happiness here and there, snatches of happiness, all there is to life. There are much more things. We are evolving. Just as we evolved from the single cellular in the monkey to this body, spiritually now that physical evolution is over. Now we are evolving in the spiritual line. The future of evolution is spiritual. So we need to move forward. And I am not the only person working for it. I am sure there are other people working for this. This is universal.
In your case, fortunately for you, the Guru came in search of you. But what about others? How do you find or identify the right Guru?
I have a few simple criteria. One is, a true Guru would be more interested in what he can give you than what he can take from you. This is a very simple criteria. Second is, you should not suddenly accept somebody all of a sudden like as a Guru. You be with that person for some time, because it is very easy to pretend to be happy and peaceful for 1 hour or 2 hours. But in life, under all circumstances, is it possible that person is tranquil? You see, Sthita Prajna, the pain and pleasure, Sitoshna Sukha Dukkheshu, both these things, they come and go. Can this person called Guru, is he tranquil at all times, or is he kind to the rich and cruel to the poor? See, so we need that is the importance of having a close contact with the teacher. First you figure out if this guy's intentions are for giving you something or taking away. If you see the person is interested in your checkbook, then get away from it. So these are some of the, unfortunately this Kali Yuga is such that we have such problems. Ancient times, when a child grew up, at the age of 8, he was initiated into the Gayatri. He did the Sandhya Vandana. There was a way of life, that's all broken down now. Discipline, way of life, all broken. Nothing is left. So naturally, I sometimes see very intelligent boys from a background. I don't want to give caste or deal anything, but from very good backgrounds who have been given Gayatri, they're suddenly running after some stupid people. I said, why are you doing this? You have been given the most valuable mantra when you were a small boy. Why are you changing it? Why can't you continue? They come to me and say, can you give us a mantra? So what's your name? So and so. What's your father's name? So and so. So you were initiated into a Gayatri at the age of 8 years. Why aren't you chanting it? What's happened? So things have broken down. This is the time to sort it out.
Your own guru told you that dependence on a guru alone could be an obstacle.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's one thing we have to be very careful about. See, a great teacher never wants you to be dependent on him. Look at Ramana Maharshi. It's a great example. He did not want anybody to depend upon him. He said, find out for yourself. Well, blessings are a different story. That will be there. When a guru, real spiritual person is there, you will get blessings. You don't have to cringe for it. It's natural. It flows from them. Yeah. But suppose somebody comes and asks me, how do we go to Pondicherry? Now my job is to tell him how to go there. If I know, I can even not know and say wrong things. That is different. Now instead of, if he has to reach Pondicherry, then he'll have to follow that and reach there. What is the point if he stands here and does puja and aarti to me and garlanding, you are the greatest man, you showed me how to go to Pondicherry. You have to go. So I am not saying you should disrespect the teacher, I am saying the teaching is more important. That's what I am trying to say. Teaching is very important. If you don't follow it, what is the use of just doing puja? It doesn't mean anything. Maybe that is also good. After several lives you may come back to sadhana. This is possible.
I think Babaji also told you, if I am not mistaken, that no teacher is better than a wrong teacher.
Absolutely. Today also I told the satsang, today, it is better not to have, because when you don't have a teacher, God is guiding you anyway. It's better not to have a teacher than to have a wrong teacher. Then you end up in such trouble. Then you have to relearn, break so many barriers before you go back to your original source. You see, that is the problem.
What is your opinion about the connection between religion and spirituality?
Now, if you look at any religion, now when I say religion, it is little difficult to include the Hindu system of thought into this, because it's not exactly like a religion. It's a whole input from several sources which have been worked out into wisdom. There is more spiritual than religious in this matter. So, but generally I am saying, when you look at a religion, you will find that there has always been a founder. Now, in case of the Hindu Sanatana Dharma, you can't identify a single founder. There are many rishis who have had many experiences. But generally, there will be one founder of any religion, even a Semitic religion, and a single teacher, single book.
Excepting maybe Hinduism.
Exactly. So, even when there is a single teacher, single religion, what I am trying to say is there is one founder. Now, that founder would have had some kind of a profound spiritual experience, definitely. Mystical, you can say, not even spiritual, mystic. Based on that mystical experience, he has formulated certain religion, a certain way of life, saying do this, don't do this, do this, do this, so that people in that locality, in that geographical location, in that milieu, in that time, learn how to move, so that ultimately they can get that mystical experience which he had. This is how all religions start. Problem is, after some time, they get mixed up with imperialism, they get mixed up with power, and they mixed up with organization. Then when the organization, which is the outer shell, becomes more important than the core, then it is destroyed. One safety in the Sanatana Dharma about this is that even though there are many mathas and there are so many disciplines and there are so many Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, Advaita, and so on and so forth, there is one common thread running between, which is purify your mind. Nobody says no to this. There is a common thread, right? So, the connection between religion is the external manifestation of the inner experience, But if that becomes more important than the inner experience, then we are sunk.
So is that your answer to the relevance of rituals also?
See, at one time certain practices were given to people for a certain purpose. Now, if the purpose is forgotten and we are only doing the externals, then it becomes a meaningless ritual, not otherwise. Not otherwise. See, ancient times, all the family people, grahasthas, are supposed to have a fire home. They did their own homa, they did their own yajna, they did everything. There were no professional priests, right? Each household had themselves. It is after that decline that the professional priests came into the picture. Now, like any other profession, it can get corrupt. It is the same with rituals.
Very true, very true.
Really, look at it.
Now, in the present world, don't you think we have a lot more of dharmic conflicts than we had earlier?
I think so. I think so.
Why is it so?
It is not dharmic. It is given out in a dharmic facade. But deep down, if you look, it's something else. Vested interests, imperialism, power hungriness, and various factors, and politics coming out in the form as a facade. They use dharma. It's not dharmic. Dharma itself is a great word. You can't have a dharmic conflict.
Okay, religious conflict.
Religious. This is what. So this is what happens. That the religious facade. Sometimes I go and communal riots are taking place. Okay, you go and look carefully. You talk to people. You figure out communal, yes, outwardly. Internally, two political parties are creating problems for two sets of people to fight. Deep down, it is something else. Self-interest. It is not dharmic. I refuse to believe that dharma can ever create a conflict.
And what is the solution?
Solution is each person, especially in this country, our country, we can start with our country, we can go to others later. First our house in order, then the neighbors. We should go directly and deeply into our dharma. It's not because it is more dharma that we are having these problems, it's because of less dharma. Young people should understand our dharma properly, what we are doing, what is our ancient history, what is it that is the aim of life according to the ancients. All this has to be studied and brought into modern terms. And no young man is going to read it unless we translate them into modern context. If you simply say, why should I read Ramayana? You have to put it in a context. I think if this happens, then we will know how to handle other dharmas also. We don't know our own dharma. How are we going to look at other dharmas? First we should know ours. What is our dharma now? Pornography, watching TV 24 hours. What is this dharma? You look at it, 10 young people sitting together, you ask them their names, they may have separate names of different religions they belong to. What are they doing? Same thing.
Coming back to jnana, again Babaji has told you that the burden of knowledge that you carry with you can be a barrier to your understanding of reality.
That is true, which is not only what Babaji said, it's a very ancient teaching. You will find in Ishavasya Upanishad. Ishavasya Upanishad is one of the shortest Upanishads, but it is a core Upanishad, one of the principal Upanishads. There is one sloka in that which says, Andham tama pravishanti vidhyayam upasate. That means those who worship avidya, ignorance, enter into darkness. But the next sentence is even more shocking. Those who worship knowledge enter into greater darkness. What does that mean? Are they playing with words? Or are they joking? Actually what it means is that knowledge is necessary. But when knowledge theoretical becomes more important than the actual, then we cannot come face to face with the truth. Now Shirdi Sai Baba was not considered to be a scholar of Vedanta or anything. One man went to him, one Maharashtrian Pandit, Chitra, what are they called? very orthodox Brahmins of Maharashtra, and told him, "You are a fakir, I don't know you will understand this, but I want to say that they are saying that knowledge is also a hindrance, like ignorance to knowledge. Do you have any idea?" He didn't expect him to answer. He said, "Listen, I don't know Sanskrit, but listen, when you are walking on the footpath and in the grass, and if a thorn gets into your leg, into your heel, and you want to remove the thorn, you tried many things, not coming out, then you found another nice thorn, big one, which you use to take out the thorn that got stuck in your heel. After taking it out and throwing away, will you stick that thing which you used to back there? Then what is the difference? You still have a thorn in your foot." So he said, that man was very shocked, because he never thought this man, a fakir who is sitting there with a cloth around his head, would know and saying sometimes Allah Malik hai, he would know anything about this. He said, knowledge is used to take away ignorance, but if knowledge itself becomes ignorance, then how will you know the truth? You are stuck. Apart from the fact that pride develops. Too much pride. I know this, I know that. So that itself is a barrier, because the ultimate supreme truth, even according to Vedanta, cannot be defined. And if I have my own definitions, how will I approach it? I should go with complete humility, saying, I don't know.
You were having a heavenly stay in the Himalayas with Babaji, with Tengashi, Siddhar, so many other great saints. And once when Babaji told you to go back to the plains, go back, what was your reaction?
I didn't agree with it.
You didn't?
The first I said, I am not going back, because I said, why should I go back into the muck? I am so happy here, I am so free here, I am living my life like a free bird. Why would I go back into the mud, into the stuck? And Babaji told me something which even now it keeps working in my head. He said, I thought that I was training you to become kind, compassionate, that your mind will become wider. You become so selfish, so self-centered, you are enjoying this. You don't want to go back and do something about people who are in muck. So why did I train you first? He said, you think you are a Buddha, you are a Buddhu, he said in Hindi to me. Go back. So I said, okay, this is Babaji's command, let's go back. But it was not easy for me. It was also tough to get back to this world. It is very tough. Sir, it's like a small child learning to walk. First you crawl, then you fall down, then you stand up, then you take faltering steps. Coming back is equivalent to that as going there. You know, like going there is also like that. Coming back is also like that. It took me some time to adjust to this world, because it's not easy. And then anyhow.
You had a longing when you went there.
And I still had that longing when I came back. I said, I will do my job, but my anchor is out there. So.
Now, after coming back to the plains, what is your state of mind now?
Sir, my mind is like a clean slate. Okay, I write something on it, and by evening I rub it off. Again I write, what I write may be different in different days, different situations, but at the end of the day it is wiped clean like a slate when I go to sleep. Now when I go, for instance, for a satsang, yes, I have read the Upanishads, I have read, all that is true, but I don't think of the Upanishads or the Gita, anything at all when I go for a satsang, because I want to maintain that clean slate mind, you know. And in fact, to avoid thinking about the subject, I usually read some Tintin or some Asterix or some light thing and keep my mind away from the subject. And sometimes the organizers get very worried, because just before entering the hall, I asked them, hey, you, what is the subject today? They think this is going to be a mess because this fellow has forgotten everything. Why? Because my mind is then clean. Just when I go, I know, this is the subject. Okay, then I sit down, I chant the Guru Mantra, Sri Guru Bhyo Namah, and then I talk. And then at the end of it, people say, oh, it was nice. I said, I don't know. Even question answer session goes on. If people ask me, shall we write questions and give it to you beforehand? I said, no. Please don't do that. Then my answers will be very artificial. You just ask. Because I have this freedom to say I don't know if I don't know. There is no burden, I don't carry a burden. I can easily say I don't know. So what? Who is going to do anything? Anyway, nobody can do anything to the Atman. It's established.
What is your opinion about the upbringing of the present day youngsters from childhood up to the adulthood? Are you happy with what we have?
I am not very happy, but there are some pockets. There are some people who take extra care. I wouldn't say everybody is like that, but in general I am really not very happy because they don't get sufficient inputs of important things that would stand them in good stead, not only in spiritual life but also in physical life. Many of them live in such I wouldn't, not that they are rich, but today everybody can get luxuries, most of the luxuries, medium, and they live completely caught up in that. If they are put in a place where none of these things are available, they go mad, they get completely crazy, they don't know what to do with their life, then they take to drink, they take to drugs. So this is not good at all, and it is the defect of the educational system actually. So we should introduce this in the educational system. It's not easy, people are not willing, but I have seen in some pockets it's working. So it might be possible that it catches up.
But there is so much of resistance.
Very much resistance. Yeah, but whenever there is something nice to be achieved, there is always resistance. If there is no resistance, then there is no fun. We need to work on it. I think if you don't have any vested interest and if you are doing it for good, then you will do it somehow.
But don't you think in this process, so many generations are being wasted?
I know, that's true, unavoidable. What to do? But that means that we shouldn't say, we should save time now. There is not much time to waste. If you produce robots, human robots, the world will be destroyed. There is no compassion, there is no kindness. Somebody will press one button and the whole thing will go to finished. So there is no time actually. The urgency of the work is there very much. So you see, I am 69 years old now and I am still running every day here, and I have nothing to attain or achieve from anybody, but I keep, why am I doing it? Because I feel a compulsion that things have to change, we can't leave it like this. It's not possible. And I think the powers of nature are with us, so it will work. I am not the only one, as I said, who is working, there are many.
There are many others too.
Some are unknown, and some which are unknown are more powerful than those which are known.
And do you think for attaining spiritual progress in life, one has to remain a bachelor or one has to go to the Himalayas?
No, not at all. While we don't have this brahmacharya, grahastha, vanaprastha, sannyasa divisions now. So that brahmacharya period is missing. If that is there, then the rest of the thing will be put in place properly. So the training of the students should be such that they know how to control themselves, how to gather energy and not dissipate it, how to do useful things. All this they should learn in their youth. If they do that, and even when they are married and they are doing other things, it is possible for them to be spiritual. There is no need to get bogged down. Which doesn't mean that there is no function for sannyasins. There is, but very few people can really take sannyas and jump from brahmacharya to sannyas. It's not possible. Often what the problems we hear nowadays among sannyasins is because of this. Not prepared enough to get into that way of life. And as far as spiritual matters are concerned, there is no compulsion that you should be. Even that is the teaching of the Gita. The Bhagavad Gita says to be a sannyasin doesn't mean that you should stop the fire. Stop the fire means your householder's fire. That's what it's a symbol. It means to be able to function without getting lost in the ups and downs of life.
Samadarshana.
Samadarshana and Sthita Prajna. These two things have, if they are developed, there is no need to be not married or anything. In fact, a married life is conducive to spiritual evolution. All the great rishis were married people because it teaches you at least to cut your ego.
Not only that, in fact, according to our system, if you are not married, you are not allowed to do these yajnas and
Absolutely, you can't. You don't have a partner.
Your dharmapatni should be there.
Absolutely. Somewhere along the line, this thing about too much leaning towards sannyasa has destroyed this culture of ours.
In a sense, can we say that is the difference between Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Vivekananda?
No, the thing is that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, even though he was not formally a sannyasin, at heart he was a greater sannyasin than all these sannyasi disciples of his, including Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda, on the other hand, did not advocate that everybody should become sannyasins. What he said was, for this particular work at this juncture, we require men who have no other interest in life. So he formed the order. It's not otherwise. There were so many great householder disciples of Ramakrishna whom Swami Vivekananda respected, including Girish Chandra Ghosh, who was the famous dramatist of Calcutta. So it's not like that. And if the sannyasins think that they are become proud that they are the greatest, then it's downfall of dharma. Who is supporting the sannyasin? The grahastha.
Yes. A sannyasi cannot even cook
How?
by himself.
He shouldn't. He is not allowed to.
Not allowed.
He can't plow, he can't have agriculture, he can't do so. Who is looking after him? What about the food? The grahastha has to provide. So grahastha is a very important part of society. And I think in spiritual progress it makes no difference. According to me, no. Yeah, short periods of solitude are great. That you can do even otherwise. Right? You can, and as far as the Himalayas is concerned, while it is not essential for spiritual progress to go to the Himalayas, to go to the Himalayas is a worthwhile thing even for married worldly people some time in their lives, because the place does have something special.
Something spiritual.
Yeah. So it need not be that you should run away forever to the Himalayas, but you can always go.
You can experience.
You can experience, you can go, you can wander, come back, carry the experience with you. I have great, I would say, regard for the Himalayas as if it's a living being out there.
After about or even more than 60 years of your physical spiritual journey, are you still a seeker, or?
I don't think I am a seeker anymore. But I also don't think that I am 100% perfect, because I think as long as the physical body exists, there will be some little imperfections there. That will happen only after the body goes, that one can be completely videha mukti. But till then, I think I am free in many ways.
In spite of the body.
Yeah, I think so. And
what is your advice to the youngsters of today?
My advice is, don't get misled by propaganda. Lead a sincere and truthful life. Keep your body and mind fit, body and mind fit. Don't neglect the ancient classics which have come down to us from time immemorial. Balance the material life with spiritual life. Don't abandon the material life, but don't neglect your inner spiritual development. This is my message to the youth. And we need young people actually who are sincere, who want to help others, who want this, not only this country, but see, ancient Vedic thought is not only for one country. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. So we should have people with that feeling that the whole world should live in happiness. This should penetrate the minds of the youth. Physical exercise and keeping well fit is a very important part of this.
Thank you, Guruji.
Thank you, sir.
It has been a great educative experience for me talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Please bless me.
Since you knew your homework, so it was a wonderful thing for me. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Om Namah Shivaya.